Hello and welcome back to Logan Sounds Off. Today I'm very excited to interview one of the coolest singers and songwriters, overall artists, because there's a lot of projects that he's done here that we're going to discuss. And an amazing artist at that, David Keenan, a legend of the music scene. Hi David, how are you keeping?
One legend to another then. If I'm a legend and you're a legend, thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much, David. It's great to have you here and to chat about your career and new music as well. But before we do get into that, I would love to ask you, for those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'm from Dundalk originally. I've been writing songs for 20 years. I'm 31 now this year, so started writing songs when I was about 11. I'm just obsessed with music and storytelling, and so grew up in Dundalk. Big influences were obviously all the Irish writers, and I lived with my grandparents for a good while, so I was influenced by them and their storytelling. And my grandfather was a great character storyteller, so that definitely came about in the songs. But growing up in Dundalk, the guitar was like the outlet and the pen and the paper for me. So I suppose I started releasing EPs in maybe 2015, 2016. And then that led to my first album in 2020 after I moved to Dublin. I'm recording. And so, yeah, I'm on to album number 4 now, which is great, you know. So I feel like it's brand new again for me. I feel like it's brand new because of where I'm going on this new album. And I've been doing some composing and different things on the side. So it all lends itself to what I love, making music and bringing things into the world. Yeah.
You always keep us on our toes, David. You're always changing it up with each project. But kind of before we get into where you mentioned there, even just before the EPs, the first start, I would love to ask you kind of, you mentioned there living in Dundalk, and I know some of the Irish writers were an inspiration there, as you mentioned. What other, and I don't want to just limit it to musicians because you're definitely a storyteller in your songwriting. What was inspiring you at a young age to write music and also write lyrics?
I think it was just escapism. Like I remember singing songs when I was about 4 or 5, and I just felt connected to this bigger thing. And people put different names on that bigger thing, but I think part of the discovery for me with music and creativity has been exploring that energy, that space of, seeing short films in my head and then trying to put them down on paper and trying to shape songs around that. And like we spoke about the Irish writers, characters that I'd see on the street. I left school pretty early, but I went into the local library, and that's where I discovered the beat poets and poets from like the likes of Wilfred Owen from the First World War that were, commentating, using their voice, commentating on the futility of war and systemic, you know, systemic wrongs, things that you were seeing in society that you weren't being taught about in school, but you had this kind of intuitive understanding that there was something missing. And I looked to people like Jinx Lennon, and then voices that really, scared me and moved me, like Billie Holiday. And I remember hearing The Mercy Seat by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds on a tape recorder when I was about 12, and just being shook by this voice that was coming back and the story that was telling me. And so, I've been on the road for a long time writing songs, and then when you leave Ireland and you start traveling, you bring your Irishness with you, and you get in tune with different cultures. And I was always going into art galleries and museums because I was just obsessed with how other artists in different mediums would express themselves, be it in dance or, painters like, Jan Miro or, Francis Bacon. I think it's all storytelling. It's all human beings making their mark, trying to get these feelings that are kind of universal but unique to the individual, trying to get them out. So my means of trying to get my voice out and untangle whatever knots that were in me was always music and art, and being open to being inspired by people, places, and things all the time. You know, um, I just like writing a song can be very a practical thing, especially in the world now. Like the things that are happening in the world. For me, I'm going back to poetry again, because poetry is something that's, can seem very kind of abstract and surreal, but now it feels very logical in the face of what's happening in the world. Reality and systems that were supposed to make sense to us are now unraveling everywhere. So I think for me now, the logical thing is to go back to that purpose all the time. There's almost like there's more reality to be found in art in the modern world and storytelling than there is in actual what we're seeing online, what we're seeing in the news. So I've always been curious, and I always look for inspiration in art and music and story and people, and it's a real just I'm just obsessed with exploring all the time and different. You say that every record is kind of different. It wasn't really a conscious thing. It was more of just, if I wanted to explore how I'd use my voice maybe and try to, a soulful way, the likes of Amelioration, the new single, is that. It's me trying to make new discoveries with my voice. And so I've always used maybe the song or a different style of song to hear myself in a different way. So it's all like self-discovery and looking for connection as well with other musicians, and it's just really connection, I suppose. Yeah.
Wow, that's a really cool way to kind of
That's a
put.
rambling, and that's a
No, no,
rambling.
no, no, no. It's not rambling at all. It's illustrating a really interesting way of writing music, because as you know, I have a lot of guests on here, and I usually hear about a lot of musicians, which is always really, really interesting as a music fan. But I also love to hear about other things, like as you were mentioning their beat poetry and
Mm,
artistry. And I think that particular kind of nearly a fact at this stage is that the modern world can be so different that nearly escaping into art is more realistic than how crazy our world is. And I think
yeah.
that's a really, really interesting point that you made there. So thank you for that. And you mentioned there where growing up in Dundalk. Earlier on in the episode, you mentioned that your grandfather was a very kind of had a lot of character storytelling, and I know he had a big impact on your songwriting. So I'd love to ask you, kind of, could you tell us a little bit more about what kind of stories were you being told and how it nearly changed your songwriting style, or maybe how it formed it in the early days?
Yeah, he was a great. As I was saying, he would tell me stories about his youth, about characters in Dundalk. But I think it was the way that he would romanticize situations, and I think storytelling, you do that naturally. When I was growing up in Dundalk, I was trying to make my reality, more beautiful and more colorful. So you romanticize your surroundings and your environment. But my grandfather, like, I suppose the biggest thing in his stories was the characters. They all had these like amazing names, like the Biz Fleming or Lightning Brown or Maz Ba Martin. And when he would talk about them, he would become really animated. So I was always like, well, I wonder how they dressed. I wonder what cigarettes they smoked. I wonder who are these people. And I suppose what he was doing was he was passing down the tradition of Irish storytelling in his own unique way. But I suppose maybe they're disappearing now in our society, is the headers. Every village, every town had a few of these headers that would, they were like lovable rogues. Maybe there isn't as much space for people like that anymore in our culture. But um, I would see what storytelling would do to him physically, how he would light up, and I got a passion for that myself. So that passion and that fire and that love for devilment and the crack, all that's an energy that I wanted to put into my own music, and so I started looking around me and seeing my own version of these characters, and then I was growing and I was changing and I was trying to figure out who I was in and amongst all that. So the storytelling tradition was really rich in my upbringing, so that comes into the songs, I think. you know
Yeah, that's really, really interesting and really, really cool. And where you mentioned there kind of that weaved into the songs, I'd love to start talking about your early career as a musician, which I thought was, I believe, the Cobweb single. But then I found on SoundCloud a really early song, Beggar to Beggar. And that was like, I think, was that your first song that you ever released?
Um, yeah. So Beggar to Beggar actually ended up on my second album, What Then? But I had written that in Liverpool in 2013 when I moved to Liverpool to Busk. I actually moved to Liverpool to Busk, but I moved to try to find Lee members of the Lads because I was obsessed with the Lads. I was in a FOSS course, and I think the last week of this FOSS course, you were allowed to use the internet. And I discovered this blog called Diaries of a Rock and Dole Star. And I was 18 and I was on the dole, and I maybe thought I was a bit of a rock star. I wanted to be a rock star, whatever that meant. It just resonated with me. And so I read this blog, and this guy Chris Parks, was a bit like yourself. He was really obsessed with music and the intricacies of the Liverpool music scene, the Shaq and Michael Head and songwriters like that. So I listened to all that, and then I went on this like pilgrimage to Liverpool because I wanted to become better and more experienced, and that beat poet Kerouac thing on the road. I wanted to go and travel, and my budget at the time only stretched as far as getting the ferry to Liverpool. So I wrote Beggar to Beggar in a hostel, and it felt like a real song. When I first remember writing it, and one of the lads was with me saying, "What's that song? Who wrote that song?" I was like, "I've just written this song." So it was this like electricity, like lightning in a bottle. So I think I put a version of that up on SoundCloud when I came home. And probably, yeah, that would have been the first single I put up. There was also a song called Picket Line that I put up as well, that I recorded in a venue, the Lomax, which is long gone now, but I recorded it upstairs in this venue in Liverpool, and it's kind of rootsy and very inspired by the Lads. So I put that out as well. And I think for 2 gigs, I was called Cobblestone. I wasn't called David Keenan when I came back from Liverpool. I did a gig in on Dame Street. Retro Revival was the name of the gigs. Luke Gleason used to put them on, and I did a gig as Cobblestone. And I think I had like the Friary, and I had El Paso, and I had Beggar to Beggar, and maybe this song Picket Line. And I was just so hungry, man. I was just so hungry to get all these songs off my chest and to learn all the time, to get better as a writer. So you did some digging there. You found those early recordings.
I try my best to get back as far as I can because it's really interesting, those early days, and I loved hearing about that. And I didn't know you went busking in Liverpool, and that's really really fascinating, kind of to see that you went from Liverpool to the EP, which after Cobwebs you released Strip Me Bare, and then Strip Me Bare Volume 2. Um,
Yeah.
were you thinking that there was going to be a volume 2, or was it just casually something that you thought, actually, I'm going to run with this name for a little while? Was that ever going to be an album? Or I'd love you to kind of tell us about that particular project.
I had so many songs. I had so many songs. I always have songs lying around, and I think I was really anxious to start getting some songs out so I could gig, because I was gigging and the set list was long, and there was only maybe 4 or 5 songs up online for people to listen to. So, um, so Strip Me Bare Volume One was actually recorded in Glenn Hansard's house, just over one microphone. I actually met Glenn, and he was someone I would have looked up to when I was younger, and you know, we were just in the house, and he had a mic at the piano. So that song "Altar Wine" and Lawrence of Arcadia and the Groundskeeper, that was all at that one mic, and I was playing a guitar. It was a Gibson guitar, but I think before 1912, Gibson were called Dead Gibson. So this was a Dead Gibson guitar because I think it was like
Wow.
1910. So the fact that it sounds so rich and warm was actually because of that guitar. And I thought that because I had been experimenting, and I could never capture the live thing properly. I could never capture that magic. And those recordings were the first time that I felt like, oh, that's how I sound. That's how I want to sound. So the volume 2 was just an extension of that. And there was talk about maybe, you know, a record deal being offered, or there was a crowd in France called Electra that were interested, and then that fell through. So I got impatient and I wanted to put out more songs. Because first and foremost, I'm a songwriter, I think, and then the song has led me to be able to, you know, grow in different areas. But it just felt right, just me and the guitar, and I think, you know, people tell me they prefer me and the guitar. The band stuff came later, but it's nice that I have those kind of EPs as a document of just me and the guitar.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. And I was kind of listening to Strip Me Bare and those early EPs going, it was really, really kind of raw, especially at the end. I think it's the Cobwebs single. You have a spoken word or poetry part nearly to it. It was very raw, those early releases.
Yeah,
So when I got onto Evidence of Living, um, I was kind of going, wow, this is a lot more. There's a lot more musicians on this. It was very a lot more different to the other EPs. But I do want to ask you about on this particular EP, you collaborated with Laura Quirk of Lemoncello, who I got to interview. So the interview to Lemoncello will be linked down below. Um, I would love to ask, with Evidence of Living, how did the collaboration with Laura begin on that one of the songs on that EP?
I think I just moved to Dublin. I moved to Dublin around that time, and so I started playing in a band. I did a gig upstairs in Whelan's, and I had some friends that just got a ramshackle band together for that gig. And you know, we're all kind of the same age, so we're all coming up at that time. So you start hanging around with people, and then I wrote Evidence of Living. I wrote it the first time I was in New York, and I wrote it and I brought it home because in New York, the steam comes out of the ground, you know, and that's where the chimneys of steam line came from. But I think the chorus of that is me really holding up like a light saying, is there anybody else out there that kind of gets it? Is anybody else? I was looking for a tribe. I was looking for a tribe, and I'd met Junior Brother as well. And so myself and Junior Brother and Lemoncello started playing together, and Garrett Quinn Redmond started playing as well. And so by this point, I had the makings of the first album, Beginner's Guide to Bravery. But in the middle of it all, I started playing with these heads, the more folk heads. And this other group of songs kind of came about because I think you're inspired by whoever you're around. You know, our environment inspires what's going to come out of us. And so Two Kids came about because I had seen a homeless couple in Dublin, and it kind of set off this train of thought with this song. And then it just felt natural. You just get into a groove with people. And I just heard another voice on Two Kids in particular. So that's how that came about. And then Evidence of Living was almost like a kind of it was like a manifesto song. Do you know, it was something that I wanted a whole room to sing, and something I wanted to uplift. You know, you see Big Jim Larkin on O'Connell Street with his hands raised. You know, it was that. It was a call to arms almost. You know, to try to get a collective scene going where everybody was inspired, and we could change something. You know, and we did change something because there was some great gigs, and that's more than enough. You know.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that song's so powerful. And where you're mentioning they're getting together with friends and recording a video reminds me of Subliminal. Dublinia, which I'm excited to chat to you about soon, which has a live video, which is really, really interesting. But I'll be getting into that soon. But before I do get into
Yeah.
that, actually, a small release that I do just want to discuss was the Mahogany Sessions that you did before you did your debut album came out. Um, how did that Mahogany session come about?
I can't remember. I think I was doing something in London. I think I was doing a couple of gigs in Islington, and they just reached out. I think maybe I was on tour with Hosier at the time. I think that was probably 2019. And again, I have this habit of maybe there's a release coming out, but if I write a song, I'm really excited by that song. Maybe a radio session comes along, I'll play the new song, the brand new song. I'll play that song because it's really exciting me over the maybe the new single, because you know that's past tense. That's kind of how fast I was writing songs. So I wrote A Corner Boy's Lament and Origin of the World around that time. So they weren't recorded. I ended up recording the Corner Boys Lament live in New York, but the Mahogany Session was cool. It was in this woman's house, and she lived in an apartment. It was all like the 70s, 1970s. There was like leopard print everywhere on the walls. The only one corner of the house that didn't have leopard print was the one that they shot in at the window. But Mahogany was great at the time because I knew a lot of people would hear the song because of that, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's really, really interesting though, and I love that story. But after Mahogany, we have to approach A Beginner's Guide to Bravery. Excellent title.
Yeah.
I love it. And that first impression to me was like, whoa, that's really, really cool. Um, Getting out there, obviously, um, artistically, you like to make music and release it and play gigs. You're very passionate about your music. So what was it like? Because you didn't release like a 30-minute, 40-minute album. You gave us a 50-minute album with this incredible closer at the end, this amazing album, A Beginner's Guide to Bravery. What was it like releasing that debut album?
It was a relief getting it out, you know, and it was also a time where, again, it was before, maybe now, where seems to be about brevity now. Everything is shorter now because of how people consume. But 2019, 2020, before TikTok, that wasn't even a conversation. I just wanted the song, like Subliminal Dublinia, when I played it with the guitar, was 7 minutes long. You know, it's not many verses in it. Same with Evidence of Living. So I kind of knew the record was there when I felt like I got everything off my chest, you know. And you know, it's recorded live and it's very feral, that album, but it was just of its time. It captured the energy, I think, of the band, the group of people that were around me at the time. And you know, as a first album, I think it's very vulnerable and very brave as a result of that. Even the way it's recorded, I didn't go in and overtrack vocals. I didn't. There was no cleaning up on anything on it. It was raw. So it felt like I approached it in the right way. And we did it up in the Hellfire Club. We did it. I think we were there for 5 days, and we went up for 5 days, and we just did it live, you know, and invited everybody into the control room at the end to sing on Subliminal Dublinia. And it encapsulates me that time when I moved to Dublin, was looking for a tribe or a gang, found the people, made a record, and that's the document of it, you know.
Yeah, I can see that kind of sense of community across the album, although
Yeah.
at the same time, you were reviving old songs that were written before that time, before moving
Mm.
to Dublin, some before Evidence of Living. I believe isn't Evidence of Living on that record as well. Um,
Yeah, with a
yeah, yeah.
different vocal.
Yeah, it's got all these. So you were reviving a lot of old songs. So you were maintaining your career to date, but you were also introducing and refreshing us with a new kind of um music style on your part, as well as having more people on the record. What was it like reviving those older tracks? James Dean was one of the tracks that you revived on this particular record.
Yeah, you know, again, in hindsight, it seems because there's a few years since I put it out, it feels like some songs were revived on it, but there was songs that I left off that maybe people who had come into my gigs regularly, songs on the Whitney Berry piece, even the Friary, that people were saying, why isn't that on the first album? But I'd been living with those songs for a few years, and do you know what I mean? It's hard to step back into them again. But initially, I don't think James Dean was on it, and then during a coffee break, I went in and picked up one of Gavin's electric guitars, and I didn't want to record another acoustic version of the song, so I just put it down and I recorded James Dean, Full Stop, and Snakes and Ladders. And James Dean went on the record. Full Stop and Snakes and Ladders went on the 7-inch vinyl after that. But for me, that album is like 3 acts of a play. So I had to start with where everything originated, me and the guitar, and then a piano song, and then it grew gradually into the big kind of crescendo at the end. You know, like almost like a play, like an opera or something. You know, that's the way I was seeing it. Because you have all these songs over, and then you think, how can I conceptually then tell a story. You get all these songs, but when you put them together and you shape them together, it becomes this story. I like looking at things like that, So, um, yeah. So there's multiple versions of James Dean out there. There's one of me, the acoustic, and me, and the electric. And people can't say I didn't give it its due.
It's
You
pretty
know?
cool that you can, especially with your music, you can invest in like some tracks I'd say probably have the acoustic version, then the album version, and then the live version. And then
Yeah,
probably a session version as well somewhere on YouTube that a
yeah,
company may have posted from a festival. So it's so cool to see all this music grow. And where you mentioned there that crescendo, I'd love to mention that because we've mentioned Subliminal Dublinia, and that's a live video recorded in Freebird Records and on the streets of Dublin. And before I actually just ask you about the video, I do want to ask, wasn't Junior Brother in that? I think I saw him in the video somewhere on that particular video. And I also
yeah.
saw
No, he,
Lemoncello as well.
yeah, no, we would have been there because we were doing an in store, I think, for the Evidence of Living EP, and Junior Brother would play a few songs. He played Postcards from Catalonia with me on guitar, and then he played the melodica on a song, and so yeah, and all that group were involved at that time. But that was, it looks like a setup, but I'm telling you, it wasn't a setup. It was just, we did the song in Freebird, and then I was like, I just got a brainwave of let's just go out and sing it on the street. But then we just kept walking, and once we left Freebird Records, there was a guy busking with a saxophone, and he just joined in. And next of all, people started joining in, and it was just something that you couldn't get permission probably to do it anyway. They hardly let you busk in Dublin without a license, so they weren't going to let us like 200 people walking up the street. But I think again, when you're onto something, things like that happen. Things like that just happen spontaneously.
Yeah. And also the song grew that it's like a nearly 12-minute piece with all these people and it's just it's a great idea though. Like I mean,
Yeah,
it's a very fun video though that a lot of people watching it will admire, that they'll just look at that and go, wow. There's a sense of community in the music. And I think that was sensed in a lot of ways by listeners and a lot of people it resonated with. And I'm not just saying that, I have facts to prove it. It reached number one. What was your reaction when the album reached number one? Were you surprised or were you like, I'm not surprised. I was very proud of this work. I knew I put in the work and I was passionate about it. I'm not that surprised. What was your reaction?
yeah. The reaction was just like proud of everybody involved, and I think it was the biggest selling vinyl, so people went out and bought it. That's a different kettle of fish to people streaming it. People took time out of their lives to go out and queue and get a copy of the record, and the photography on the record is beautiful. Rob Benson's photography, and I was just really, really proud, really, really proud. And yeah, again, it was all building up to this community, like you say, and then it led to the Olympia gig, and then within a few weeks, you know, the album is out into the world, and then within a few weeks, lockdown started happening, so it was, I suppose in hindsight, it was beautiful to get it out there into the world before that. But I'm really proud of the album. When you listen to your younger self, it's like looking at photographs of yourself when you're younger, and you're going, "Oh, what was he wearing? What?" That's what I think when I listen to my voice, because my voice has changed. I think, "Oh, well, yeah." But you have to look back and just go, "I did an album. I always wanted to put an album out into the world." Um, and it was years of just me and the song, and then it just felt like a real victory to get that vinyl in your hand. Something I never take for granted. And that, like, Subliminal Dublinia, people just walking up the street singing the song. Isn't that what it's all about? You know, that's what it's all about. That's the power of song. It's just this. It's all this equal. People just walking with song. That's what the bards in Gaelic Ireland would have done. That's our tradition. That's our culture, and it's grown. So I suppose skipping on to the new album, it's back to that. It's the conversation between our, you know, storytelling, poetic tradition, but in the context of a modern world and society where things are changing rapidly, So yeah, very proud of that first album.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see why. I mean, you put a lot of work into it, and as we've seen chatting here on this episode, you're very passionate about your music, so it makes sense it resonated with people. But as well, something else that you put out very quickly after this was a live album. It's your
Yeah.
only live album. It was also Full Stop Snakes and Ladders, the 7-inch that you put out, which is on my vinyl wish list. I hope to get it someday.
Ah,
I, I,
I have a
I, I
copy here for you. They're like, yeah, I have a copy here. They're like hen's teeth. They're hard to find, but I have a copy here for you. I'll send it to you.
no, you don't have to do that, David. You don't.
I'll
But
send it to you.
I thank you. I'm looking out for some of your records now. And the live album though, what inspired you to put out some of that? Because it wasn't just like one recording, it was snippets of different songs from a one gig and then another gig and all these different sessions. What was it like compiling it to put in to the one record?
Loved it. I love just getting the more songs out into the world, the less songs that are rattling around in my head when I wake up in the morning demanding for airtime, demanding to be recorded and released. So um those were some of the most of those recordings I think are from the Olympia gig, that headline gig in the Olympia. And again, it was great as a document to capture that for many reasons. And then I think I was in the Olympia the week before that and I was just noodling with some new ideas. So there's a song Grace Estate on there that was just maybe written the day before, and I got in this old 59 Silvertone electric guitar and some neck guitars in Dublin, and so I was really into that, and I just wanted to put that song on. And then A Corner Boy's Lament, I think lyrically is very strong, and the only version of that was on Mahogany, so that had to go on it. Bless the Mad Ones was again part of that folk part of the band that I was talking to you about, Lemoncello and Junior Brother and Gareth. Bless the Mad Ones was a song that I'd written for that group, and that's the only recording of that song. And it's this kind of trippy, trad thing that's going on, like a hallucination or something. That song. So again, it's just another document of that time, and then there's a documentary that goes along with that as well, of just, I suppose, the journey over the years leading up to that Olympia gig and the first album. So I've been lucky. I've been very lucky to come across people that are enthusiastic about my music and songs and want to document it and help me get it out there.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And as well with that live album, Bless the Mad Ones. I remember hearing that, and that was like my favorite track on that record, just because I think it was something that you said, Bless the Mad Ones because they're the only one who interest me. And then it was like you
Yeah,
just burst into the song and I went, that was very casual yet so kind of important. And I
yeah,
thought that was really, really interesting. And after the debut album, you went to Paris where you wrote a lot of the second record. What was it like being in Paris? Do you think it impacted your songwriting style, or do you think it just gave you more room for writing songs, being in a different country, being in a different space? Did it kind of show you new sides of your life or life in general?
yeah. Definitely showed me new sides of my life for sure. It was the first time I've been on my own in probably, I don't know, a couple of years. So it was just, I remember arriving at the Irish Cultural Centre and putting down the typewriter that I bought, and just kind of like, who am I? Who am I now? Who am I now? It's quiet in here. I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. Uh, so I ended up writing a little poetry book, Soundings, and yeah, I didn't write it at the time, but I went through the experience of me, myself, and lunacy. I forgot where I was actually staying and ended up sleeping in cardboard on the street, and it was a really cold February, and I think I was just coming off that. I think 2019, 2020. There was maybe 2 weeks where I had off. So I was probably coming off the train tracks a little bit, but it's strange looking back on it. It's strange, but at the same time, I got a lot done, so maybe in my discomfort, I got more writing done, because I go back to that all the time. But um, I always try to use these opportunities to do something, because like it's, it's kind of what I do. I'm here to write, to write. I'm here to write songs, and I'm here to attempt to write without the music. And I always want the words to stand up on their own. I think the words have their own music going on anyway if you read them, or they should have anyway. Um, so that's what Paris gave me, and I was lucky to get out of it.
That's really, really interesting. I didn't know that. And obviously there was a lot of inspiration from Paris because you changed something that I just thought was absolutely amazing when I saw it on your website because I saw the heading "What Then Art Gallery" and I was going, "Oh, it must be photos from that time or something, or maybe like the
Oh
liner
yeah,
notes digitized." No, it isn't. It's artwork specifically for parts of the album for individual songs. Um, how did you find pairing artwork with your music? Was it quite easy or was it difficult to try and make a connection with your music to art? Because obviously you really are invested in all forms of art, not just music. So was it, I can understand that it was probably very easy for you to connect both forms.
yeah. Well, in a sense, it was an exercise in trust because apart from Liam and Wainley and my partner Ivan, I didn't know any of the artists. Actually, there was another artist who did the cover of the poetry book, an Italian artist. But I was thinking to myself, I think lockdown was early on, or it was maybe the following year, and it was disconnect, and I just thought I need to kind of, I'd love to collaborate with people, but we're not allowed to kind of go out there and explore. So I think I put out an open call online, and I had no, I'd love, uh, I wanted Liam to paint something, and Liam was gracious enough to lend me something for a song, but it was kind of like, here's the music, and I love how other people might interpret a lyric, or and everybody interprets things differently. So I thought if I give 12 individual artists, or 11, I think there is on that record, 11 individual artists, one song off the album, and just see how they interpret it. Instead of hitting somebody with this is exactly how it means, and you know, this song was inspired by the time I went to the cinema and this happened, and it's all A, B, C, D, it's all spelled out. I just thought, like art, like you see in a gallery of this is an interpretation of this. So I just thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity to give someone a song, and then I'll have 11 pieces of art for each song on the album. So each song was like a portal of discovery, and then I was educated by each artist's interpretation of the song. Because somebody was giving it back to me, and I was learning new things about the lyrics because of that. And then I was left with these amazing pieces of art, and some were done physically and some were digital. So I just left it open. I think that whole experience was just throw it out there and see what happens. Because I'm a big believer in when I write a song, I can hear parts and I can hear instrumentation, but you have to leave the door open for someone to be themselves if you're collaborating with somebody. So if there's a band in the studio and somebody's coming in with a specific style of playing, you're going to get that specific style of playing. So you might want to bring in somebody else. Or so it's the same with any collaboration. You need to let people be themselves. Do you know that kind of way? So that was a trip, and it was a comment on the time as well. Again, when the world is changing, lean into the tools of making art and connecting with people through that way, through music, through collaboration.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, and it makes um the album nearly experience much more interesting for the listener because they get art accompanying the record. And then as well, I'd love to speak about um on Crude, you took another approach with the album experience, which is taking a more DIY outlook on recording the album. For anybody who wants to know about that kind of way you recorded Crude, could you tell us about that DIY work that you did on that record?
Yeah, I think what I learned from What Then was maybe, coming out of that experience and putting another record out and dealing with the commercial aspect of record label and industry and all that jazz. And it's a necessary kind of part of trying to deliver music into the world. But I just got pissed off. I got pissed off with other people's opinions. And not that I was, pandering, but I just thought, okay, I wanted to be crude. I just wanted to go in and press record. And it goes back to even my love of the lads I was talking about when I was a teenager. My favorite recordings of the lads are not the album. They're the kitchen tapes. They're the BBC sessions when they're all huddled around one microphone. And this amazing texture can be heard in the recordings that you're not going to get if you're separated in a vocal booth or if you're using a click track or any of that kind of formulaic stuff. So Crude was me going in with songs that I didn't really even know how to play. They weren't domesticated and they were just press record. And then I would, fall into a piano or I would, start playing the electric guitar and layering it over it. Not worried, not self-conscious. That's what I'm trying to say. So Crude was me trying to become unself-conscious again. Yeah, because I was a young fella and put out the first album and you start getting attention. And then the worst thing I think for a songwriter is to become conscious of an audience. So when I was writing songs and nobody was listening, there was no pressure. You're totally free. And I think this, you become self-conscious if you focus too much on maybe what an audience wants. And that's damaging, I think. So Crude was me trying to just become wild again and feral. And I actually love it as a record because even when I listen to it, I don't know what's coming next. I mean, in terms of like audio and stuff, it's probably not everyone's cup of tea, but that's grand because I got so much out of it. It was like embrace the ugly aspect or the beautiful ugly aspect and the character of songs again and just let them be as they are. And myself and Junior Brother recorded a song for that, Raven Towards Byzantium, that we'd started writing maybe 5 years previous on a night out in Dublin, and we never finished it. So that got on there, and God is a magpie. I sung into my guitar, and the guitar is plugged into a 50 quid little cereal box amp, and that song was what got me the boxing. We might jump to that later, but when the directors of that film heard that, so it's funny, you go in, you just go in and do what you want to do, and it always, I think, is the right thing when you're following your intuition, and you're not worried maybe about how it's going to be perceived. That's freedom and creativity, So Crude gave me all that back.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And we're going to get into the boxing film very quickly, Salivable. But before that, I actually do want to speak about a film which is Joyce's City, which where you were speaking about the Irish writers earlier, and I was fascinated by your work on this film. I haven't watched it myself personally, but I did want to ask you about it. What inspired you to get involved and write this film? And it's a short film, I believe. Is it only about 4 or 5 minutes long? It's quite quite short, but it's when I was reading about it, it seems quite powerful. I'd love to ask you, what was your experience making that film?
So what's film specifically is this? Sorry, Salvable, no?
No,
Or is it
Joyce's
the
City.
documentary?
Joyce's City. I
Oh,
thought,
Joyce's City. Yeah,
yeah. How did you
yeah.
find that
It's confusing
experience?
because
There's a lot of them, yeah. There's the
yeah.
documentary and everything. But Joyce's City, the short that you worked on, um, how did you find that
Oh yeah,
experience?
that was a commission for Bloomsday from Adrian Brinkerhoff Poetry Foundation, and they reached out through the Joyce Centre in Dublin, and kind of, would you be into writing some piece for Bloomsday, a short film? So I just sat down and tried to think, the whole notion of a city and travel and the internal monologue of walking through a city. I just tried to get into that headspace, and then thinking of Joyce and Ulysses and the train of thought, and it was then I wrote this poem, if you want to call it that, and then we shot it in Dublin over a night. Um, Luke de Bruin was the director, but it was just that whole notion of, again, the imagination. At the end of it, I say, I'm talking about the city of the mind. So you think I'm talking about the actual city, but the cars and the people and all that, but I'm talking about the city of the mind, the imagination. Because when I read Joyce, or when you read anything with focus, you're transported into that place. It's like time travel. It's like you're really focused on something. You're in that space, and I don't know if I managed to do it, but I was trying to capture, the estates and the neighborhoods of the imagination and what it's like in there, and using Joyce as a springboard. But again, Logan, that's just me, you know, chancing my arm creatively and seeing what happens. Because if you have all these restrictions on yourself, like, oh, I can't do that, or I can't do that. The way kind of my attitude growing up was, I was told that I couldn't do things, so I want to prove people wrong. you know, and then you find yourself along the way, and so yeah, I think I'm open to trying all these things and seeing what happens. Sometimes you fail miserably, but that's part of the process as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes um great art is getting that experience and working at it
Mm.
and using passion to make the art that you want to. And that's what nearly makes your music so pure and raw to most people who listen to some musicians who aren't as passionate about their music as you are, who you understand your music and your style of making music. And then shifting from one film to another, I'd love to speak about Salivable because you're
Yeah.
composing music for the film. It's not out yet, but how did you find writing music for yourself and then composing for a film? Is it quite different, or do you just find it's more you have to direct your musicianship towards a certain situation or a certain theme?
Yeah, well, that was it. I got the script. I was sent the script and I read it, and immediately songs started coming. Immediately songs started coming because it was almost like having a prompt, a writing prompt. And again, the character in the film, the main character, the story is about redemption. It's set in this place that reminded me of Dundalk. It's set in this fictional place called Still. Um, I was a fan of boxing growing up. My grandfather used to show me old tapes, and I've always loved boxing history, and I've always been a fan of boxing. But it was the character, really, the characters in the story that jumped out and inspired. This guy's living in his car. He's trying to get his daughter back. He had a lot of promise, and he got involved with some heads, with some heads, and his kind of dreams and aspirations were kind of been fizzling away. So, I mean, it was a lot I could identify with, and what a great challenge. I'd never taken on anything like that before, apart from writing the music for a play my girlfriend was in, and that just felt like a great challenge to step into. It's coming out in July, I think, in Ireland and the UK. It's out on the 2nd of May in America. But then I brought the songs to Black Mountain Studios outside Dundalk, and then I started working on the score elements, which was new for me as well, with another composer from Dundalk, Paul Jared Campbell. Um, so you just kind of, I just kind of ran with it. I didn't really leave any time for self doubt. You just kind of throw yourself into it, and I think there's 6 original songs in it, and then score.
That's really really cool, and I'm super excited to hear the soundtrack when it comes out and listen to the score as
Yeah,
well. And this isn't your only project going on at the moment. There's a lot of them. If you're not following David on social media, which will be linked down below, guys, all of David's social media pages. Folkla Convas, as you can see, I'm not too great as
yeah,
Gaeilge. I've been learning for 8 years, nearly 9 now, but I'm still pretty miserable. Your
man, far.
your your new film though, coming out about yourself. You're now making a film and also making music behind it, which we'll get to in a sec, that coincided with the upcoming release of this film. For those who don't know, could you tell us about the film and what it's going to be about?
So it's 500 days in my life, and it came about. I met the director. I did one of my songs, "Loving the Snug," for Snug Clole on TG Car. They were filming in Snugs, and because I had the song, obviously it worked. I met the director and just we chatted, and then he said, "Look, I'd love to explore making some sort of film with you about your story and maybe working class voices, Oscailga as well in Dundalk, and we look at mythology and we look at where the song comes from. You know, we try to. I think his what he wanted to do was to photograph thought, which you can't do apparently. You know, in scripts they say a director. If you're studying to be a director, he was saying that one of the notes is you can't photograph thought. So he wanted to photograph thought, and it was a joy for me to get into the nuts and bolts of how where songs come from, and you know the head, the heart, and the guts, and you see the thing happening, and then there's an emotional response, and that emotional response with what you're seeing in your head, a song is born. You know, so it looks at that, and when he reached out and said, "Okay, we've got to go ahead to make the film," he wanted me to be in the studio. So I was still working on the new album, but then I had all these new songs that came as well. So in the documentary, I'm recording these new songs, and he's just observing really, and then we go back to just my childhood, and it is Oscailga as well, and we explore the realities as well in the documentary of trying to get your music out there, dealing with algorithm and blues. You know, it's not as simple as it used to be of getting music out into the world. You know, and music being undervalued as well, maybe in this kind of entitlement culture. We want everything, consumerism. We want everything now. You know,
Yeah.
and so it looks at all. It looks at that, and it was amazing to do it in Irish as well. I went to a Gael school. That was, a great thing. My mother gifted me as a kid, send me to a Gael school. So it's all in there.
That's really, really awesome. And then coinciding with that, you released Acoustic Songs Volume 1, which what I loved about this straight off is that no streaming services. You have to buy it. You have to get it if you want the particular release, which I love. Um, and Acoustic Songs Volume 1. I believe it's part of the film, some of the tracks on that. Is that
Yeah.
is why did you decide to release that before the film? Was it nearly kind of just you wanted to get the music out there digitally, or you just felt like it was the thing to do to get people excited about the film?
Yeah, it was that because the film was being shown in North America. So we were in film festivals over there in February, March. So I wanted to have something just to show people who were seeing the film in America. Um, and it goes back to actually when you're talking about those early EPs, mainly just me and the guitar and raw, and the songs that are up in that collection, they won't be on the new album. So as people are seeing this documentary, they're not going to be able to get the music from the documentary anywhere for the foreseeable. Maybe until next year. So I just wanted to get them out there, and again, there's so many songs that I recorded, in that session. I just want to start putting a few of them out there. Um, so that's the thinking behind it, really. And it's a nice collection of songs. They're raw again, and they're feral, and there's some trad influences coming in. And my new album will be very different to that. So um, it's not really. I don't. If I walked into a room and there was a brass band, I'd probably record an EP with the brass band. If I walked into a room and there's one mic, I'd probably just sit and record a song with me and the guitar. That's how I work. Um, so it's not me trying to trick people or anything. It's just me
Yeah.
trying to find a place for all the different types of music that's in me.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And where you mentioned in there the new album, I'd love to ask you about um the lead single as one of my final questions, Amelioration, which is a beautiful word. and a beautiful act and a really incredible song. What inspired you to have that as the lead single to be releasing to give people a taste of when the new album's coming?
It just feels like a return to soul music, you know, like it's just full of soul and it's full of passion and it's immediate and it's you know, the word itself, you know, to make things better, to ameliorate, you know. Um, it just felt like that it felt like it comes out of the traps and it doesn't apologize for itself, you know. And in the context of the album, it's like setting out on the journey again. It's like call to arms. What something happens to make you kind of leave a place. So this song is kind of that. It's like lighting the fuse of the whole record. You know what I mean? So yeah, I can't wait to get it out there and to start touring again. And like you mentioned, it's been a couple of years of a lot of behind the scenes work and me growing in new areas. But to be able to get out there again in front of people, to connect with people at gigs, to feel that live medicine again, that's really what I'm looking forward to. You know, so it's all building, and you're helping me kind of tell the story again with this interview. So thanks for your support.
Oh, no problem. I'm really excited for when the single comes out. Obviously, there will be links to all David Keenan stuff down below, and I will be sharing about them on my social media. So feel free to follow both David and I so that you'll be getting updates on both of our projects going on. But before we do go, David, I wanted to ask you, as an artist, because again, I don't want to limit to music in this interview, what art have you been looking at? Poetry you've been reading, books, or music that you've been listening to? I know that's very vague. I'm not saying you have to give one of every different type, but if even if there's just been one thing that has been resonating with you and that you want to share with the listener, what would you say?
I think, look, one of my favorite writers at the minute is Kevin Barry. You know, an Irish writer. I love what Kevin is doing in his work and the character and the humor and the darkness and Marina Carr as well, a playwright. And I'm going back to things like I'm going back to like Illuminations by Arthur Rimbaud. He was a real early influence for me. You know, that's the French surrealist poet. And again, just in light of, you know, genocide, in light of what's happening in the world, climate, in light of what's happening in America, you know, in light of, you know, just modern society, poetry and music, and great art and film seem like the logical spaces now to go back to things that I loved, even like Read on Fleece by Van Morrison. I was listening to that walking the other day, and just like you said, the purity and you know, I think what's important for me today is to break things back down and to mind my own head first and the ripple effect of that. I think if we bring things back down to local level and start there, and so the ripple effect of me being in tune with my purpose today, it starts from there. So I'm going back to the things that taught me early on. Um, I'm going back to that, and I'm listening to things that are full of joy and color and that are very interesting. Like even like there's a an Irish artist called Courtesy that I heard recently in London, and I loved what he was doing with language. You know, and it's very playful. And and I'm going back to our mythology. I'm going back to that again, especially in context of the new record. It'll all make sense when the album is announced. But I'm just really grateful that I'm focused on my music and the writing, and there's always room to learn in it for me. You know, there's always room to grow in it. It's a great time for Irish music and Irish art, and yeah, the future looks bright. And so does the present. So onwards we go.
Exactly. I think that's a great place to leave off. Thank you, David, for joining me on this episode of Logan Sounds Off. Links to all David Keenan's projects will be down below. And thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Legend. From August. Thanks, Logan.
Very good. Bye, David.